Welcome to Nourish MD, Doctor Dietitian Dialogues, where doctors and dietitians empower you about your health and discuss and provide a better path to health and wellness. Proudly presented by Concierge Medical Practice Private Physicians Medical Associates, PPMA, with your hosts, registered dietitians and nutritionist, Papanos and Romana Brennan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nourish MDs. I'm one of your hosts, Lauren, and you're also joined by your other dietitian host, Romana, today. And we are going to be diving into gut health nutrition. We've actually decided to separate this into 2 episodes because this is such a vast topic and there's so much information for us to cover. If you didn't catch our interview 2 weeks ago, we talked with Dr. Quist, and we talked about the role of heartburn and reflux, and really more about the structural things that go into gastrointestinal health. And today we are going to talk about how what we eat influences our GI health. So thanks so much for joining me today, Romana. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I think let's just kick it off, maybe slight recap, but if you haven't listened to our interview with Dr. Quist, please do that. But what is digestion? This all starts in the mouth. That chewing process, starting with mechanical digestion. It's really important. So that's why everyone recommends chewing your food thoroughly, because that's really where the process gets started. We also have those salivary enzymes secreted in our saliva that help break down carbohydrates in particular. But this process of digestion really gets started in the mouth. And then, of course, goes down to our esophagus, working into our stomach, then our small intestine, then our large intestine, which is also called the colon, before, it gets excreted. We focused a lot 2 weeks ago on those kind of upper GI situation, because that's where a lot of the heartburn, reflux, that's kind of the focus area there, that upper GI tract, but we can't neglect the lower GI tract. So we're definitely going to be talking about that today. Some symptoms related to gut health that might fly under the radar in terms of maybe we're not fully connecting the dots that these are potentially GI related. Fatigue, mood imbalances, memory issues, again, seemingly unrelated to gut health specifically, but all of these things can potentially be tied to some type of disruption in our gut health, whether that's between digestion, absorption, things like that. Also, skin issues, allergies, headaches, and migraines. These things all certainly can be very directly tied to something going on in the gut. Of course, gut health can affect our energy levels. I did mention fatigue being an issue there. If we do have issues with our energy levels, we want to be considering what time are we eating? How are we eating? What is the environment around which we're eating our food? All of these things impact the speed at which we digest our food, the efficiency, the effectiveness to which we are digesting our food, and the level of which our digestion is occurring also impacts the level of which we are able to absorb all those wonderful nutrients, vitamins, minerals that are in the food, as well as, the protein, fiber, and fat. So we want to make sure that our digestion is in check so that we can actually break down those proteins, break down those fats, and absorb them to provide our body with all those nutrients, which, again, if there's issues there, that can certainly affect our energy levels, in addition to mood imbalances, memory issues, skin issues, allergies, things of that sort. So there really is a lot that can be tied into gut health, which is why we did want to take the time to discuss that in different parts over this week, as well as our next podcast episode. So let's talk about metabolism. What is metabolism, and how might our microbiome, the bacteria in our digestive system, affect or help our metabolism?
Yeah, so metabolism is a really complex process that essentially is how our body converts the food that we eat into energy that can then be used by cells for different processes. So a lot of times people just think of metabolism as creating weight loss or creating a caloric deficit, right? But metabolism is actually more complex than that. And then it's at the cellular level where we're thinking about how food gets converted into energy. And the gut can be a big bottleneck here in terms of supporting metabolism for a few different reasons. One of those is that, as you mentioned, there are bacteria that we have in our gut. There's good bacteria and bad bacteria. And some of those good bacteria are helping us to be able to digest and ferment ferment and degrade foods, and using those to be able to support metabolic processes. We know that there's one probiotic in our gut that's called Akkermansia muciniphila. And this one in particular has quite a bit of research behind its role in metabolism and blood sugar control, and has been associated with greater improvements to weight loss when there's adequate amounts of Akkermansia. So that's one example of the role of the gut in metabolism. We also know that thyroid hormones the gut plays a big role in these. And a lot of people don't know that your thyroid hormones, the active form of thyroid hormones, don't actually get converted in your thyroid. Majority of it happens peripherally, which means in different sites of the body. And about 20% of this happens in the gut. About 70% happens in the liver. But when we're thinking about the gut, some of these probiotics, these bacteria, are what are actually responsible for converting those thyroid hormones. And those thyroid hormones are what are helping us to be able to fuel metabolism. They're helping us to be able to support reproduction, to be able to support growth of hair and nails and skin and all of these amazing things, and also set the tone for our metabolic rate, essentially how many calories our body burns at rest. Now, the final thing is that we know that our gut, if there is microbes that shouldn't be there, if there's bad bacteria that are present, this can be pathogens that may be coming from foodborne illnesses or yeast or different types of bacteria that are in the gut that are causing a lot of havoc, that these can also impact our mitochondrial function. And our mitochondria are where this metabolism really originates. And so we know that if there is an overgrowth of these bacteria that shouldn't be there, that can actually negatively impact metabolism. So we want to try to strike this good balance, right? We want enough of the good bacteria that are going to help support metabolism, help support conversion of those thyroid hormones and blood sugar. And we want to make sure we don't have too much of those bad bacteria that could be actually impacting this process. And so, as I alluded to, the gut, as you can see, is very interconnected with a lot of other systems of the body. It's very connected with our hormone health, our thyroid hormone, our estrogen balance, because we remove estrogen through our stool, our poop, right? And that's kind of the end stage of our gut. But there's even correlation with our immune system. And we know that about 70-ish, maybe even 80% of our immune system resides in the gut. And our gut it plays an important role, not just in general immune system support, like helping us to be able to fight off a cold or a flu, but also in things like autoimmune type conditions where the autoimmune condition may be triggered by imbalances that are happening in the gut. So the gut really is like this central hub. And it's really important that when we're looking at any type of disease process, whether it's hormonal conditions like thyroid disorders, or it's diabetes and blood sugar issues, or it's even cardiovascular related things, that we're asking the bigger question as to what's going on in the gut. Do we have a healthy gut? Is there inflammation in the gut? Because that's going to play a really big role in the progression of these different diseases and our ability to actually manage them better through our diet. And part of this process really is driven through something that's called our vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve runs from the back of your brain down through your gut, and it really controls the speed of digestion and really helps set the tone for our body's ability to make adequate digestive enzymes and stomach acid that help us digest food. And you've probably felt this before when you get stressed. You probably notice that you have changes in your digestive function. Some people, they get loose stools when they get stressed. Other people, they get constipated when they get stressed. And that's because of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve has actually been shown to have the biggest impact on our body's inflammation levels. So if we have issues going on with inflammation, whether that's inflammation that's coming from the gut, or it's inflammation that we're seeing more systemically in other parts of the body, like our joints and our skin and such, then we have to go back to the health of our vagus nerve. How is that vagus nerve impacting the overall inflammatory response in the body? So I know I just threw a ton of information at you, but I want to go back and really go a little bit more granular to what I mentioned about estrogen and it getting removed through our poop, our stool. And this goes back to really elimination and our body's ability to properly eliminate and not recycle some of this buildup of hormones that can happen. And so, Romana, maybe you can just talk to us a little bit more about how that process works and really what's the importance of elimination and having a bowel movement every day, not just one every couple days, which I know can be the norm for a lot of people.
Yes. So, as you had mentioned, elimination via stool is one of our body's major elimination pathway. Bile is produced in the liver, secreted into the gallbladder for it to then be released into our intestines. And that production of bile is super important for ensuring that more of these macronutrients can be broken down so then we can have better absorption of these nutrients. Also helps regulate, the pH and things like that. Our digestive system is very balanced in terms of pH, so acid versus base balance, things of that sort. Our bile is packed with all of these wonderful juices and chemicals and enzymes and things like that. So bile production is super important, again, produced by the liver. One of the reasons we say that fiber is so helpful for cholesterol levels is because cholesterol is a component of bile. So we secrete it, consume enough of that fiber to then bind the cholesterol, then cholesterol is efficiently eliminated. If we are not having movements every day, some of the things that our bile is either secreting or that enters our system and is present in our digestive tract, if we're not eliminating that every day, there's potential for some of those, whether it's toxins from our food, environment, whatnot, maybe it's hormones that have been secreted and need to be eliminated just as the normal process of our endocrine system, anything like that, including cholesterol, things of that sort. If we're not eliminating that, there is potential for that to be reabsorbed into our body. It's almost like our insides taking a shower. So that's part of the reason why it's really important to have these bowel movements every day. And then, of course, for the integrity of our large intestine, for our colon, we need to make sure that we're eliminating every day so that we're not having increased pressure on those tissues. We may have heard of diverticulitis, diverticulosis, where like these little pockets form on the outside of our colon. Another really important mechanism to ensure that diverticulosis doesn't turn into diverticulitis, which is going more from like acute inflammatory, angry state. We need to make sure that we're emptying our bowels every day so that food isn't sitting in there and getting trapped in those pockets, or stool rather, getting trapped in those pockets. So that's just kind of another side note. One of the other reasons that it's really important to be eliminating every day.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that gives us a lot of insight into the importance. But for someone that maybe is like, okay, well, that's great to know that that's important for me, but I can't do that. That's humanly impossible for me to have a daily bowel movement. Then are there things that they can do that are beyond just eat more fiber, drink more water, to be able to help someone facilitate daily elimination?
Two things that are super important to think about. A, what is your movement looking like? We know that when we're sedentary, and a lot of us can't help the fact that maybe throughout the day we're a little bit more sedentary based on our work environment, things like that. But we know that if we can get movement throughout the day, it's helpful not only for all of the different muscles in our body that's directly involved, but our digestive system is a series of muscles. So when we are sedentary, when the body's slowing everything down, that can also slow down our digestion. So getting movement throughout the day, if you have it available to you, maybe you can go on a walk first thing in the morning to really get your body moving, ensuring that your body knows, okay, now it is daytime, we are active, we are ready for the day, we are ready to regulate all of these processes. That can be really helpful. We, of course, know that hydration is super important as well. Drinking enough water, ensuring that you are replenishing any lost electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, potassium, things like that. Maybe it's incorporating an electrolyte drink to make sure that you're properly hydrated, not just pounding with 100 plus ounces of water, but making sure that we are replenishing those minerals that might be lost in your sweat, in your stool, things of that sort. So those are two of my main considerations, some things that people don't always think about when they're like, oh yeah, now I'm suddenly constipated. Oh, I haven't realized that I'm not moving as much, I'm not drinking as much water, maybe I'm not replenishing those electrolytes. Another thing that I find helpful more for those acute times when maybe we are a little bit more stressed, we need a little bit of additional support, in addition to increasing fiber consumption slowly. If we're not having too much fiber in our diet, we don't want to overload in a short period of time, but also drinking warm liquids. So those warm liquids can help activate the muscles of the digestive system. Again, our digestive tract is made up of a bunch of muscles. So having those warm liquids can be helpful, like a ginger tea. I love ginger. Ginger in any form can, again, be helpful for what we call gut motility. So the movement, the contraction of the muscles of the digestive system can also help secrete stomach acid and get those digestive juices secreted and flowing. So really helpful if you can incorporate ginger in any context. Another thing that has somewhat more of a laxative effect as opposed to just increasing the movement of your gut, your GI tract, is aloe vera. So aloe vera juice, or you can also use the gel, not as great in terms of texture and flavor, but aloe vera juice, even just a quarter to a half of a cup, can be mixed into water, which can really help get things moving along. We don't want to overdo it, of course, but if you do find that you need a little bit of additional support in order to have a daily bowel movement, that can be helpful as well. Again, not overdoing it.
Enjoy high-quality supplements shipped right to your door with full script through Private Physicians Medical Associates, PPMA. Reap the health benefits of pharmaceutical-grade vitamins while saving 5% on all orders. Set up your free PPMA account today. Visit privatemds.com.
Lauren, what are some other constipation relief strategies that you find helpful for your patients?
Well, I think that those are great for just helping in the like maybe everyday type setup, or in, like you said, more of the acute phase where maybe someone's not dealing with this every day, but wants to have some options on hand for if and when they do get constipated. For example, a lot of people do when they travel, or like you said, when they're stressed. But I think that overall it goes back to, which I know we want to talk about, which is the 5R approach, which is really how we address the root cause. Because even though some of these approaches are more natural, like aloe vera is technically like a medicinal food, right? It still kind of can be a Band-Aid to not to helping, and it's not really addressing like, why is this constipation happening so chronically? And that's really what we want to target, because that's what's going to help you to not need that support when you don't have the ability to use it, and really be able to get to the root of the issue of why you've had lifelong constipation. So that really, the 5R approach is not something that we invented. It is very common in the more like integrative field of medicine. And essentially that 5R approach is remove. So that's the first step. Then we replace, then we re-inoculate, we repair, and we rebalance. And we have a little bit of like a revised version of that 5R approach that we really like to use with patients. And the first step of that is to open up the body's natural elimination pathways. So, for example, if step one of this 5R approach is to remove, then yeah, it can be really helpful to make sure that we're removing anything that's driving inflammation. So if we know that you are having food sensitivities to a lot of things, or you are having, very clear signs that there might be, say, like a dairy intolerance. You're getting like mucus buildup after you eat, or maybe it's a very clear sign you have gluten intolerance. Maybe you have like chicken skin on the back of your arms. These can be clear signs to us that there's probably some intolerance of either of those two proteins or sugars that's happening. And so removing those right off the bat can be extremely helpful. And then any other things that could be fueling inflammation. So if you have reflux, for example, heartburn, then we might want to remove spicy foods, caffeine. If you are experiencing issues with cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, we might want to remove those initially too. Maybe not forever, but we may remove them initially to be able to help the digestive system calm down a little bit, so we can do a little bit of repair and kind of reshifting in terms of what's going on in the gut. But alongside of removing these things, we really want to support our body's natural elimination. And what I mean by that is making sure that we are adequately hydrating to support elimination through our kidneys and our urine, that we are adequately eliminating through our stool, that we're pooping every day. And that's where some of these more acute strategies, like you mentioned, Romana, such as aloe vera or minerals like magnesium, can be really helpful, is to really support this opening of the digestive system so that we can then go into the next part of this process, which is really to start to replace and kind of kill off some of these imbalances that are going on in the gut. So opening and removing these triggers is really important as that first step. And then after we've done that and we're feeling really confident that we've brought down some of that inflammation in the gut and that the body is eliminating more efficiently, then we might start to talk about or start to address issues that might be going on with some of these digestive juices, like you talked about earlier. And these are things like stomach acid and bile and digestive enzymes that our body releases to be able to help us degrade food. And so, Romana, maybe you can just briefly touch on what goes into, what are some of the things that we look at when we're talking about replacing and supporting our body's natural digestive juices, both on a at-home level of what could be done without using any supplementation or outside support, and then what our options are and why we might lean on more of the supplemental type support.
Definitely considering that upper GI, heartburn, reflux, that could be a case of low stomach acid. It's very possible. Indicators of maybe more insufficiency or just lower activity of digestive enzymes. Maybe you eat a meal and feel like it's sitting so heavy with you, or maybe you have an issue if you have more of a high protein meal where it feels like those proteins maybe just aren't sitting super well. Maybe it feels like there's a brick in your stomach after eating, belching or bloating or discomfort, even a couple hours after your meal, things of that. Some of those indicators that maybe we need to initiate support in that replacement area. So when it comes to at-home strategies, we want to think about what are the types of things I'm experiencing, if it's more consistent with low stomach acid. So maybe that heartburn, maybe you're on a PPI, proton pump inhibitor. It functions to lower your stomach acid, but maybe it's having the opposite effect. Or maybe you have some hypothyroidism, which can slow down metabolism, slow down the production, the secretion of stomach acid. Maybe we need to implement a little bit of apple cider vinegar before our meals so that we can replace some of that acid production that's been suppressed. What is your specific recommendation in terms of if someone's going to implement that for stomach acid support?
Usually about a tablespoon seems to be sufficient. I would make sure that it has the mother in there so that you are getting some of the cultures and things, but definitely dilute it with a little bit of water, not too much water, because we don't want to go to the other end of the spectrum where now we're overhydrating, because that's going to dilute the amount of digestive juices your body's making. So 3 to 4 ounces with about a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar tends to be a good ratio.
That can be, again, helpful for if we're experiencing that low stomach acid, maybe it feels like our body isn't quite ready to digest our food and we need to kickstart that process a little bit. I had mentioned ginger earlier. That can also help as a pre-meal type of, if we're having a tea, maybe we do it about an hour or so before our meal. Again, as Lauren said, so we're not overhydrating right before our meal so that we're diluting those digestive enzymes, that stomach acid. Also implementing something like a digestive bitter or eating bitter foods at the start of your meal. That's something else that can trigger, again, that secretion of the stomach acid. So there are what are called tinctures. So they come in little dropper bottles that you can add to just a couple of ounces of water, similar to how you might do that with the apple cider vinegar. I know some people who just drop it straight on their tongue. It's a little bit stronger of a flavor. If you're eating out, one good tip that I actually learned from Lauren is making kind of a little aperitif for yourself, even if it's just a little bit of sparkling water. Maybe you can order some bitters that they might use from the bar and incorporating that into your water for just a little bit of that bitter taste, bitter sensation. But things like those bitter greens, even things like grapefruit that have a little bit of that bitter flavor can be helpful to initiate that enzyme production, that gastric juice production. On the other side of the spectrum, meal hygiene is really in reference to how you're showing up to your meal, We want to make sure that we're in what's called the parasympathetic nervous system state as opposed to the sympathetic state when we are sitting down for a meal. So sympathetic nervous system state we can associate with that fight or flight response, versus parasympathetic is more of that rest and digest. This circles back to what Lauren was describing in terms of the vagus nerve being super responsible for all of our digestive processes. How we activate that vagus nerve, how we transition from the sympathetic to parasympathetic state at our meal times. Maybe it's box breathing before you inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. Mentally, this can create a little box. That can be a helpful breathing strategy to ensure that you are moving more into this rest and digest state. Also practicing gratitude, being thankful for your meal in whatever context that might mean for you. Just taking that pause has also been shown to help move us into more of a parasympathetic state. Lauren, any other ways that we can support this process?
I think that those are all really good tips and tricks for people. And there's obviously supplementation that can be used as well. So I think, you covered a lot of the places to start, things that can be done with just food sources that you might have in your kitchen, or more of like these lifestyle type practices, like you mentioned with the box breathing. For some individuals, it can be helpful to have a little bit more targeted support through supplementation. And that's where we might assess your needs individually and then provide you with a recommendation through our professional grade supplement dispensary FullScript. There's different types of digestive support that's out there. A lot of people kind of go just the normal digestive enzyme route, but a lot of times people need more than just enzymes, because remember that enzymes really just help us degrade protein and carbs. You also might need ox bile to help you break down fat. You might need more betaine, which is what's going to help us really break down more of your proteins and provide stomach acid support. So it really can be an individualized approach to really figuring out what is the exact cocktail, if you will, that you need to really be able to replace these juices. I think that once this replacement has been done, and a lot of times I find that this kind of takes the longest, like it could take 6 months of us really having to work on replacing these digestive juices. It might even be something you have to be cognizant of every day. Like I know for myself that when I get stressed and I sit down for dinner, I have to seriously stop myself. Last night I had to stop my husband. I was like, stop, slow down, put your fork down, like calm down, because you are definitely eating in a fight or flight state right now. And I know your body's not making enough digestive juices. So sometimes you really just have to call yourself out, call your partner out at the meal, to really bring awareness to when we're eating in this rush, this heightened state of stress where we're not getting enough of these digestive juices released.
100%. It can be a little bit convicting to notice, oh, no, I'm always eating at my computer in the middle of the workday when I'm in a frenzy doing 5 different things. So it can be a little bit convicting, but I think we're all victim to that at least some point in time. And I think it's so important that we can just kind of check ourselves and take a moment to consciously pause and be like, okay, how am I showing up at this moment? So why don't we move the conversation to this third R, this re-inoculate phase. We might be re-inoculating with probiotics if we needed. The whole point in this re-inoculation is to rebuild the gut flora, support healthy microbiome. So we have this prebiotic as well as probiotic focus. Lauren, why don't you get us started in this conversation diving into probiotics?
Yeah, so this is a big conversation. So we'll definitely finish it up in part 2 as well. So stay tuned for the kind of remainder of this conversation. But I think the overall point that we want to hit home on is that probiotics aren't just a magic weapon that really should be used in all cases. And sometimes adding probiotics can actually be harmful to the gut because you might already have too much of those different bacteria, and it might be too much of a good thing, if you will. And you might have a different issue going on that really is where you need more support in the gut. And so they can work really well for some people. Generally, it's individuals that maybe aren't eating enough prebiotics in their diet to be able to feed the probiotics in their gut, or individuals that maybe have a history of using antibiotics and these probiotics are getting wiped out through the antibiotic use. But there are some minutia within probiotics. There's different types of probiotics. There's shelf-stable versus refrigerated probiotics. There's spore-based probiotics. And so we want to really cover like what are the differences in these that you should know about, and when should you use probiotics and what type of probiotics for more of like a therapeutic basis for acute issues you might be dealing with versus using them for more everyday type digestive function. So we will get into all of the details on that in part 2, which will be up and coming in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for that episode. And we'll also be covering in that episode, really talking about this final step of this gut repair, where we want to really focus on repairing with certain nutrients to be able to help rebuild the gut lining and also really rebalancing the flora in our gut. So we'll be highlighting all of those things in part 2. So we'll see you guys back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this is informative, kind of shed some light as to the different variables that go into the gut. I know we talked about some complex topics today. So if you need to re-listen, slow it down, please do so. And of course, we're always happy to set up an individualized consultation with you to really determine what your individualized gut health needs are. You can do so by giving the office a call, and we would be happy to schedule an appointment. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks for part 2.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Nourish MD, Doctor Dietitian Dialogues. This podcast is intended for general educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult with your healthcare provider before beginning any nutrition or supplement recommendations. Sign up for our mailing list so you'll never miss an episode of our wellness journey. See the podcast description for the link.